Welcome again. Here we are at week 8, and this week we're going to be talking about the balance line. Remember back in week 3, we spent the whole week on the alligator, and we're coming back to revisit that alligator and revisit the balance line this week. This week our goal is to understand and know how to use the balance line signals. This is the 5th dimension. Remember that the first dimension was the fractal. We covered that in week 4, and then in week 5 we covered the AO, the awesome oscillator, week 6 the accelerator, decelerator, and then in week 7 the zone trades. And now we're going to put it all together and enter our last grounded assessment, and this is what we take our signals on, and this is what we make our trades on, and this we call the balance line trades. So let's go over to our slides and look at the balance line trades. This is Professor Alligator again with the balance line, and this week we're going to review what is the balance line. Remember that the balance line is that place where the current price would be if there were no new incoming information, which we know is chaos. Let's look at that on a screen. This is the balance line, and the balance line is a 13-bar smooth moving average of the midpoint of the price bars that's displaced 8 bars into the future. So looking at it on the chart, if you see this square here, inside this square there are 13 bars. And if you were to take the midpoint of each one of those 13 bars, average it out, what you would get would be this point right here, where the cursor is. And that cursor is offset 8 bars into the future. Now remember that the balance line is where the price would be right now if there were no new incoming information. So the difference between the balance line and where the current price is can be attributed to new incoming information. That's very, very vital information for your trading and your success. So reviewing again, just to make sure you understand, and hopefully by this time you really do, the balance line is simply a 13-bar smooth moving average that's displaced 8 bars into the future. An interesting way to think about the balance line is that this balance line is a continental divide. This is the top of the mountain. So that anytime the price moves away from the balance line, whether it's going up here or whether it's going down, both directions, up and down, are basically downhill from the balance line. So the prices can move much easier in this area because it's moving away from the balance line than it can in this area, moving toward the balance line, moving toward the balance line here, and moving away from the balance line. So one thing to keep in mind always is that prices move away from the balance line easier than they move toward the balance line. Let's illustrate it this way. The balance line would be this center part right here. This is the balance line, and pretend that you have a ball that's sitting right on this balance line. It's in equilibrium, and it's at rest, and all it takes is a little bit of push to push it over the side, and then gravity, which is a strange attractor in the real world, would pull it down. The same thing is true with prices. As prices start to move away from this balance line, the prices have momentum in their favor naturally, and they're going to move away easier. So the path of least resistance for either one of these balls would be down on the right here, down on the left here, depending which way it left the balance line. That we call a saddle point. And a saddle point is basically a point of equilibrium which can be upset very easily by a little bit of new information. Doesn't take a lot. Let's take another example. Here we go with the balance line again. The balance line is in the middle, and this is the saddle point, and this guy is trying to go uphill. It's going to be tougher for that guy to get uphill than it is for this guy to go downhill. Another way of putting that from a physics standpoint is it takes much more energy to move the price toward the balance line, much more new information, stronger new information, than it does to move the price away from the balance line. So this guy going away from the balance line, and any prices that go away from the balance line, move easier than those that are going toward the balance line. Let's take another illustration from an actual chart. Here we have a 13 bars on this square here, on this rectangle, and notice that they're coming toward the balance line. And the movement from this bottommost point to the balance line was 56 points. And it took 13 bars. Now, when that price crossed over the balance line, and remember that's the top of the hill, they're going uphill here, and they're going downhill here. 13 bars after it moved away, it moved almost three times as much. It moved 161 points away from the balance line. This is a good illustration of the path of least resistance and how the price naturally moves away from the balance line. And in our trading, we want to take advantage of that at every opportunity we can. Let's go to the next slide, putting those two together. Moving away from the balance line is the same as this guy running downhill. Moving toward the balance line would be comparable to this guy going uphill. Let's go further. Now, let's look at how we locate new information. Let's take a couple of examples, and then we'll use several charts to illustrate this. Our job today is to understand how to read new information. So let's assume that we have a balance line here, and this is the top of the mountain, and going away from the balance line is easier than going toward it. We have a bar here. This is one bar. Then the next bar has a lower high. Now we want to look at what new information is. And as you know, that this bar and any bar is always a battle between the buyers and the sellers. On this second bar here, the buyers have lost ground. It's kind of like a football game. And up here they're on the 40-yard line. Down here they're back on the 30-yard line. The sellers have pushed the buyers back on the ball field. So what we want to know is how much information would it take to get that back on the 50-yard line. And basically it would take this amount of new information, enough new information to move the price to the top of this little square here. So this particular part here is new information. Now it may be just a bit confusing, but think about it and we'll simplify it this way. Anytime you're looking at the price chart, you want to read from right to left because you're looking at the back in the time into the past to see what it would take to overcome what these people have done. So new information allowed the buyers, or the sellers rather, to take this high price down here. They were able to take it down this far, but then the buyers wouldn't let them take it any further. So in reading both the fractal and the balance line, which are the two signals that you read from the price chart, you always read from right to left. When you're reading the momentum chart and the zone chart, you want to go with the momentum, you want to go with the zone. So in those two charts, you always read from left to right. So this is the new information that's contained in these two bars. Now, let's take an example. Let's say that the next bar comes down here. Well, what that tells us is at this time period, the sellers were more powerful than the buyers, and the buyers, pushing as hard as they could only get it up to this part. Our question then is, where would we be wrong in being short here? And we would be wrong when enough new information comes into the market to overcome this square here. And if new information comes into the market, then we know that the people who were trading in this time period, the sellers have been overcome. Now let me review that again real quickly. We read new information by going backwards in time, by going from right to left. And the new information for a buy is always going to be the highs. The new information for lows, the opposite would always be the lows. So if we have a bar here and then the next bar here, that tells us that the buyers in this period, the second period, were able to overcome the sellers, and the sellers could only take it down that much. The new information we're looking for, again, is the difference between the two lows, because we're looking for a place to go short. Now, you might want to review this in your computorial. There are more reviews of this in the computorial and in the book and in your manual. We're putting it in 3 different ways in 3 different places to make sure you can get it and make sure it becomes automatic to you. Now let's go back to the slides, and let's illustrate this again on the slides just for review. Again, we're locating new information. Now, at this point, what we have is the balance line. And on the balance line, just as we illustrated on the board, we have a bar. And then we come in with a lower bar. Now, once this second bar is created, then the new information is that block right there, the difference between the highs. So if we're looking for a place to buy, and if we're in a trend and the trend backs up and we want to get back into the trend, then the balance line signal is probably the best deal we have. So that becomes new information. Now let's put another bar in there. The difference between those highs, once this bar has been finished and is created, the difference between those highs become new information there. Let's take another example. Let's complicate it just a little bit. Let's put an inside bar. Now, if you're looking for a place to buy, then the thing you're interested in is the difference between this high and this high. If you're looking for a place to sell, you're looking for the difference between this low and this low. So this particular bar, which we call an inside bar, has 2 bits of information. It has new information both on the top and on the bottom. So the new information is in both places, and we would read from right to left, and we would have the new information for the buy would be there, the new information for the sell would be there. And then if we have an outside bar, on an outside bar, we have no new information created, because in the highs, the sellers were not able to bring the buyers low, and on the downside, the buyers were not able to bring the sellers back into line. So in an outside bar, we have no new information. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review this. Again, the new information basically comes from the new highs and new lows reading from right to left. Let's look at this another way. The way we want to put an order in here is that if we're going away from the top of the mountain, and remember that away from this is the top of the mountain, the blue line, the balance line, the 13-bar smooth average that's offset 8 bars into the future, and we want to stay going with the trend and going downhill, because it's easier to go downhill than uphill. And going away from the balance line, and we're going to spend more time on this and in detail, but let me just preview it right now. If this were the current bar, then we would want to go long 1 tick above this bar. If we're going away from the balance line, we want the base plus 1. If we're going toward the balance line, in this area here we would be selling, then we would need base minus 2. So this would be our base bar, this would be our 1, and this would be our second bar, so we would have a sell down here. Now, realize that the balance line is here, and we would be selling into the alligator's mouth. So in this condition, we would have a sell signal here, but we would not sell it because we would be feeding the alligator. And we would go up and up and up, and in no place in here, and remember from the alligator, we don't want to feed the alligator. So at this point, we would simply, we want to simply notice these signals, and then later on during the week, we're going to show you which signals we are really going to take. So this is enough for your first day. Think about this. Go back to the computorial again, as we just suggested. Go back to the book, go back to the study manual, and make sure that you understand several things. Number 1, that when you're looking for the balance line, you're always reading from right to left. Anything you do on the price chart, you're reading from right to left. And new information is reading from right to left. For a buy signal, you're only interested in the highs. For a sell signal, you're only interested in the lows. And on the chart, when you're looking for a signal, if you're going away from the mountain, it's base plus 1 or base minus 1. If you're going toward the mountaintop, it's always, you add to it because it takes more steps going uphill than going downhill. It takes more energy, so it takes 2 steps. So it's base plus 2 for a buy or base minus 2, new lower lows for a sell going toward the mountaintop. Tomorrow we're going to look at this in more detail about buying and selling above and below the balance line. And we're going to spend all week on this, so be patient. This may seem a little bit difficult at first, a little more difficult than the others. It really isn't once you get the hang of it. We'll see you tomorrow. Make sure that you do your morning pages, your AT again, and get ready to have some fun. See you tomorrow.